So that's it. The season is over. The final victor is rolled into victory lane. The champion is crowned. And for the next 6 months of our lives, we get to debate whether or not Fernando was truly impressed by his test at Barber Motorsports Park. So the final IndyCar race at Sonoma ever, or at least for the foreseeable future. I would suspect ever, but you never know. Things have come back before, like Portland and like Laguna Seca is next year. But for the time being, it was the final race, and it's probably the best race that the Sonoma racetrack has ever put on for IndyCar racing in terms of actual on-track competition, but maybe not so much for the lead. And we'll be certainly talking about the dominance of one particular driver. But the focus on this race particularly was the championship fight and the climactic conclusion to what was going to be a predominant battle between Scott Dixon and Alexander Rossi. Through double points, there was an outside possibility of Will Power or Joseph Newgarden getting or lucking their way into a championship. But that was a very, very long shot, and thankfully it did not come into play this year. Why there are still double points, I'll never know. But regardless, the race was going to get underway with Scott Dixon on the front row, Alexander Rossi 2 or 3 rows behind him on the starting grid. Rossi did not have as good of a qualifying run. He was in the Fast Six. They made a tire strategy call in the Fast Six to qualify on black tires so that they would have a fresh set of sticker reds for the race. That was their strategy going in. Unfortunately, things did not go to plan on the start of the race, and I'm not talking about the NBC broadcast, which was incredibly botched because of a extended red flag at the end of the NASCAR race. Not going to rant too much about that in this video. I already did a 10-minute rant last night, so if you want to complain about NBC, that's the video to do it. This is not it. We're just going to be talking about the race itself, and as the green flag flew, not 200, 300 yards after the start-finish line, Alexander Rossi and his championship hopes became unraveled as Rossi made contact with the rear end of Marco Andretti, his teammate and the boss's son, no doubt about it. He ran into the back of him, broke the front wing. The front wing was trailing off of the car, cutting down the front right tire of the Napa Auto Parts Honda. Rossi immediately knew he was in trouble. He was getting swamped, and he cut the course, went on to the NASCAR portion of the Sonoma Raceway to essentially shortcut the track, which, according to race control, is illegal to do, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Rejoined the track, kind of in a precarious position with traffic all over the place, managed to get it down into pit lane. The repairs were made to the car, but he did eventually lose a lap because of this, and because of that, that may be why race control was fairly lenient on what transpired here with Alexander Rossi cutting the course. A lot of people have talked about this. Of course, Sonoma Raceway has several different track layouts. IndyCar uses what is probably the slowest version of the Sonoma Raceway that's out there. A lot of chicanes, a lot of hairpin corners, and obviously they also used the carousel corner, which was bypassed by NASCAR around, I think, 97, 98, to kind of speed the track up for those cars, make it potentially the race a little more exciting. IndyCar doesn't use that particular configuration of Sonoma. So when a driver is in trouble or has issues or whatever, they will be able to take the NASCAR course, which is a lot simpler, a lot easier, and a lot shorter to get around, and be able to get the car back to the pits safely without getting in too much of the traffic's way. But Rossi was clearly booking it. A lot of people were watching his onboard stream through the Verizon app and were saying he was absolutely running at 10/10 on the NASCAR circuit, despite the fact that he had all this damage to the front of his car. Obviously, don't blame him on that one, but was this a penalty or justified as a penalty thing? I'm not so sure. Again, to the letter of the rules, he did exactly what he could do. And as we've seen in the past, IndyCar has been very lenient toward their championship competitors in situations like this. I think back to 2010 at Homestead, there was a yellow flag thrown for Will Power brushing the wall, and the yellow remained on for a very extended period of time as the Penske team pushed the car back into the garage area to enact repairs to it. Ultimately, I think Power only lost a couple of laps when really the race should have been put back to green very early on, and he would have lost a ton of laps and absolutely 100% been out of the championship. Yeah, that's race manipulation, no doubt about it. Was this race manipulation? I certainly think it's close. I don't know if it's 100% race manipulation, but I certainly think it was race control turning a blind eye to the situation. Regardless, it did keep Rossi within an outside chance of being able to at least compete or at least give Dixon some sort of a challenge towards the end of this race if absolutely everything fell his way. Well, it looked like everything was about to fall his way as Takuma Sato absolutely killed every bug in Southern California with a huge engine failure. Smoke absolutely all over the track. It actually reminded me, ironically enough, because it was a Honda engine, of some of the failures we saw in 2016 with the Honda engines, particularly on the side of like James Hinchcliffe, I think had a major engine failure in the 2017, I think it was Carb Day for the Indy 500, and of course we saw lots of Honda engine failures last year. That started making me question whether or not we were going to see mass Honda failures throughout this race, and of course the two championship contenders who were really in the fight were Honda-powered cars. But there was no caution. Interesting that race control was willing to keep this green. I guess the course observers didn't observe very much oil or water getting on the track and potentially causing an unsafe circumstance for the drivers, so they kept it green. So Alexander Rossi was going to have to get back on the lead lap the old-fashioned way, which was pass people, and pass people he did. He got around Scott Dixon. He had hounded Dixon for quite a few laps. It looked like Dixon might have been willing to fight him, but Rossi was on fresher tires and dove up the inside of Scott Dixon, and Dixon wisely didn't contest it much more than he needed to. And then it was on to Rossi to try to battle with his teammate Ryan HunterReay, and this got very interesting. It looked like a no-brainer situation. In this situation, you've got a championship car and a car that's not running for the championship. Even if that car's running in the lead, there's a potential that if a yellow comes out, HunterReay, if he has Rossi a lap down, Rossi will not be able to get back to the back of the field on the lead lap. So you would think they'd be radioing in, and they indeed did radio in to Ryan HunterReay. Get out of the way, Ryan. We got to get Rossi back on the lead lap. Well, Ryan HunterReay maybe helped him just a little bit to try to get around, but then when Rossi screwed up in the hairpin, it was back around goes Ryan HunterReay. Enter the pit strategy. I believe Rossi came into the pits just a couple laps earlier than Ryan HunterReay and eventually beat him out of the pits under the green flag. So as Ryan HunterReay was attempting to lap Alexander Rossi, suddenly the second Rahal car gets in trouble. Graham Rahal stopped on the back straightaway of the course, and the yellow flag finally flies. Rossi on the lead lap, or gets back onto the lead lap. Again, the old-fashioned way, and it was going to take the old-fashioned way of absolutely bullying your way through the field for Rossi to get back out into the fight. He put on fresh sticker reds during the yellow flag. He was already at the back of the queue anyway. It wasn't going to matter. As they got back to the green, it was chaos. This whole race, in fact, was chaos. 3 and 4 wide racing, cars running into each other. This is Sonoma, remember. Really cool to see that the Universal Aero Kit actually really improved this race. It's a shame it hasn't been around for all of the Sonoma races. But yeah, there was a lot of passing from Alexander Rossi. Some amazing moves, incredible moves. This is the kind of stuff, I think I even said on Twitter, we're going to find out what Alexander Rossi is made of right here. And boy, did we find out. I've really thought about the comparison with Alexander Rossi and his driving. I think he's a combination of the best things about Michael Andretti and the best things about Alex Zanardi. Those are two drivers that were very influential in my life early on when I was watching racing, and they were two of the dominant guys, and they did it just through some of the most hard-nosed, passionate racing ever. And You look at Rossi and what he was doing. I mean, that was exactly it. The move on Joseph Newgarden. Absolutely incredible. Even if there was a little bit of contact, maybe avoidable contact. But again, race control hasn't been calling avoidable contact all year. So I don't know what to tell you on this at this point. If that was the thing that you got upset about in terms of avoidable contact on the road courses. And then we saw Tony Kanaan be incredibly kind to Alexander Rossi. In fact, very obviously waving him by, getting his hand way out of the cockpit to let Rossi know, hey, go on by, come on. And I have to imagine, conspiracy hat on, I'm sorry, tinfoil hat on, I have to imagine that has something to do with Tony Kanaan maybe getting fired from a particular team that was also going for the championship this year. Just kind of have to feel that way on that one. But Rossi worked his way up in this short period of time in the race from essentially 24th on track, which he was when he was a lap down, all the way up to 5th spot. There were some strategy calls on that with fresh tires, coming in early, undercutting a few cars, but certainly hard-nosed driving as well for Alexander Rossi. But at the front of the field, it didn't matter. And unfortunately for Rossi, there was no caution flag to bunch up the field again. The front of the field was Scott Dixon and Ryan HunterReay. And, you never know, would Dixon have been able to maybe challenge HunterReay if the situation had been different? If he hadn't been battling for the championship, who knows? Dixon was driving a very Dixon race this time around, and that's what he had to do. I think that's what everybody thought he had to do, and that's exactly what he did. Ryan HunterReay brought the heat, takes the victory in the Sonoma Grand Prix. And since Ryan HunterReay took the win, I guess we should probably talk about him. Ryan HunterReay is a guy that has flown under the radar quite a bit over the last few years, and it's actually kind of interesting. Remember his credentials, an Indy 500 champion and series champion in 2012. This is a guy who can be incredibly dominant, which we saw in the second Detroit race this year, and we saw here as well. I think he led virtually the entire race and certainly was never really truly challenged at the front of the field in this one. Essentially, he led all the laps. If you think about where everybody was on strategy throughout the race, he was essentially unchallenged throughout the race. If he didn't have the bad luck that he has had, where he'll have mechanical failures or accidents that aren't necessarily his fault, he could be certainly a championship contender, and I certainly think he's driving on the level of guys like Rossi or Dixon. He's fully capable of that. And come 2019, certainly I think Ryan HunterReay has made an incredible statement here that he may be the guy to watch, or one of the guys to watch for the championship next year. Now, of course, a lot of things are going to depend with a lot of the moving parts around the Andretti team, what kind of support he has, where exactly he's driving next year, what he's driving, all those sorts of things are going to play, and who his teammates are, of course, too, are going to play into how things are going. And it was interesting, the way he raced Rossi when Rossi was trying to get back on the lead lap was a very clear indication, hey, pal, there's not a number one driver on this team. You may be driving like it right now, but I'm going to show you that we're 1A and 1B here. There's no such thing as a number two. Well, maybe it's Veach, but not between those two. HunterReay, I think, made a very clear political statement there, and I think it was message received from Alexander Rossi. I would not be surprised if there's a lot of love lost between those two going forward in terms of on-track activity, because they are challenging for that number one spot at Andretti. Speaking of, another driver who had a pretty good day, Simon Pagenaud. Apparently, he finally figured out his road course setup. Of course, he's a championship caliber driver. We'll see what happens in 2016. And one more quick shout out about drivers. Pato O'Ward, the Indy Lights champion, the current Indy Lights champion. I guess he'll be reigning next year because he probably won't be defending. He'll probably be in a Harding Racing seat no matter what form that team takes on. Pato O'Ward got into the Firestone Fast 6. He scored a top 10 finish, kept the car on the road all day. Fantastic job. Now, it should be noted that Pato did have a car, and in fact, according to the reports, both Harding cars, including Colton Herta, had chassis that were upgraded with the Andretti parts, meaning the shocks, dampers, spring packages, suspension pieces, brakes, all of that stuff came from the Andretti shop. Essentially, they stripped down the Harding Racing cars, keeping the Chevrolet engine and tub of the car, but everything else was from Andretti. Now, I would wonder about Colton Herta's car, or maybe it's just the fact that the car number 88 has never been that good all this year, and suddenly when Harding has a second car, that car was immediately on pace. That was a bit interesting to me, because Colton hasn't really been that far off of O'Ward throughout the Indy Lights season, but suddenly they get into Indy cars and the gap is that wide. That may speak something to Pato's talent. I don't want to bring that down any, but I was kind of intrigued to see the 88 car still kind of struggling near the back of the field. But yeah, Pato O'Ward is going to be a name we're going to be talking about a lot next year. He's clearly a guy with a lot of talent. He's going to be hired to drive a car next year, and that certainly speaks volumes to the state of the sport right now, and certainly it's a good thing. I can't wait to see what the future holds for him. But I would say to the broadcasters or people who are maybe talking about him, he's not the next Elio. Let Pato be his own thing. Just because he's slightly enthusiastic about all of his racing and he clearly has a good personality, there's only one Elio and there's only one Pato O'Ward. Let's market him as Pato O'Ward going forward. And so, finally, the guy we really should be talking about and haven't really talked a whole lot about during this video is Scott Dixon, the 5-time IndyCar champion, the guy who has now tied A.J. Foyt for the amount of IndyCar championships, and it's hard to believe that he will stop at 5 championships. Dixon just drove the Dixon race. He drove an incredible season as well. I guess you could call it the perfect Dixon season. And you look at some of the things, like I said, at Portland, he's like a Terminator. Even when he has bad luck, he's the guy who drives out of the dust cloud and flipped over cars without much of a scratch on his car. Dixon is, clearly, the stats show it, one of the best drivers ever in IndyCar racing, and that shouldn't be understated, and it certainly shouldn't be understated for the guys that actually can go out and beat him. We're witnessing something that's incredibly important in Scott Dixon, and we should appreciate him. I know, myself included, when I was younger, watched Scott Dixon, 08, 09, that era. Certainly, we thought of him, I think the phrase was, he was Tylenol PM, he was boring. Oh God, Scott Dixon's won another race. We really should appreciate him while he's around because of just how, we have to recognize greatness here. And this is truly greatness. And really, he's been elite in every aspect of his life. And so, like at the end of last year, we're going to be talking a little bit, I guess, about marketing going forward. You market him as the best. You marketed him as the LeBron James of IndyCar. He is the GOAT to a certain extent. And you may hear on the social media that people don't like dominance. Dominance does bring in a certain crowd. There is a certain crowd attracted to watching a sport for the first time and being able to say that guy is the best. And so having a guy who's a benchmark, I don't think is a bad thing. And so that's how I think he should be marketed. Just kind of like last year where I said Joseph Newgarden needs to be marketed as the face of the series. Well, you need to market Scott Dixon as the best driver in the series, and that may ruffle some feathers. Certainly, most marketing ploys do, but that's the way it should be because that's the way it is. Where do you think he won the championship? I remember I was talking a lot about where I thought Alexander Rossi lost the championship, which was at Detroit, that brake lockup into this third corner or whatever when he was trying to fight with Ryan HunterReay. Hey, look, we're back to that point on the board where these two are fighting each other rather than kind of looking at team results. But ultimately, that wouldn't have cost him the championship. What won Dixon the championship was ultimately the strategy call that they pulled at the Indianapolis 500. Double points of the line there, remember as well. They got him out in the front of the field on fuel mileage, and he brought home a third-place position ahead of Alexander Rossi by just a couple of spots. Guess what happened at Sonoma? Almost the exact same thing. Almost exactly the same places on the finishing order as well for the two of them. So you look at that, and again, a perfect season for Dixon, more or less. The Phoenix wasn't that great for Dixon, but outside of that, I don't even remember if he had a DNF. I'm trying to think to myself, I don't think he did. So, wow, just excellence. Excellence in racing from Scott Dixon. So, there's not much else to say about Sonoma. It was a final race. It was a decent race. It was certainly probably the best Sonoma race that IndyCar has ever put on. And this is it. This is the end of the season. Don't worry, we still got plenty of IndyCar content coming. Obviously, the Fred Watch is going to be going on, and apparently Casey Kane Watch is going to be a thing now. We got to wait 2 years for Tony Stewart to come in the Indy 500, as we found out a couple weeks ago. But yeah, it's there's a lot of content coming. Don't you worry your little head. Stay right here for the latest racing news, talk about racing. Obviously, we've got some sim racing stuff to do as well, and hopefully I can surprise you with some cool content coming down the line. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments, what you thought of this race at Sonoma, what you think of Dixon as champion, what you think of Alexander Rossi and his pursuit in this race of the championship, and let me know what you're expecting for 2019. I think it's going to be much more of the same, and certainly if a guy like Fernando Alonso actually does show up next year, it's just going to make things or elevate things to yet another level. So thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a great season. There have been a lot of ups and downs, but I can't wait to do it once again in 2019. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you in the 2019 season.